Welcome to DYOPATH Connections. I'm Bill Borbas, and today my guest is DYOPATH Executive Vice President of Marketing and Sales, Chuck Orrico. Chuck, welcome to the show.
Hey, Bill. Nice to see you again, and thanks for having me. I appreciate it.
I'm excited. It's going to be a lot of fun today. We're going to be talking about advanced security. But before we get into it, I'd love to hear, for you to talk about your role and maybe some of your passions outside of work.
Okay, sure. So my official title at DYOPATH is Executive Vice President of Sales and Marketing. Basically, what that means is that I am responsible for helping the company to identify, develop, and grow the business in a more strategic direction from a strategic and larger account perspective. And I will assist everybody in the organization in helping us to deliver customer service centric solutions on the front end as well as on the back end to our clients.
And I noticed you have a DYOPATH Cares shirt. Can you tell us a little bit about what that is?
Yeah, sure. So the company as well as myself have some very specific passions and interests that we care deeply about. DYOPATH as a whole typically focuses a lot of their passion and their desire to help others in the children's community and in the veterans community. And so we pour a lot of our time, efforts, and the finances that we've been blessed with to help those organizations primarily in those areas.
Excellent. And I know that there is more information on the DYOPATH website. So let's jump into our topic of the day, advanced security. How do you define advanced security?
Well, I guess the best way I would define advanced security is that we see a lot of organizations make the mistake of focusing on very specific point solutions or very specific technology products like intrusion detection or intrusion prevention that are very technology specific. And the way an organization should really treat security from an advanced standpoint is to take more of a holistic approach and take more of a comprehensive approach where it's not just about the point solutions and the tools that you're deploying into your architecture. It's starting from the very beginning and defining what is your strategic roadmap from a security perspective. What are you trying to achieve overall from a security posture? And that involves developing and designing processes and procedures on the front end and making sure that you have very comprehensive disaster recovery and continuity of operation processes and procedures. What are we going to do in the event of a disaster? How are we going to maintain operations in the event of a disaster? And how are we going to recover from that? And so you start by really identifying what are those key business processes in the organization, simple ones that sound simple, but they're very critical. When you talk to leadership or you talk to the frontline workers, how long can they be without email? Is it an hour? Is it a day? Is it 2 days? Is it not at all? And so you have to understand what those recovery objectives are before you can even begin to build an overall advanced security program. And once you've understood those, you develop your overall procedures, processes, your DR, your continuity of operations. It's not until then that you begin to then look at, okay, once we've developed that, how do we take it to the next level and make sure that we can prevent incidents from even happening in the first place? And that's where you get into the advanced security management and monitoring, SIEM solutions, security information and event management. And that's where you start to evaluate the tools, the technologies that are available in the marketplace that you can deploy as part of your overall strategic plan. And when you come full circle, you then continually review that plan. You continually review those tools and technologies and make sure that you're constantly improving them as new threats emerge. So on advanced security, that was a long way of saying that advanced security is a holistic and comprehensive plan that takes all those factors into consideration.
How do you start? So how do you understand, where would a company start to, when they're looking at what are the threats and where are my gaps, and I guess what does that starting point look like?
Well, first of all, it depends on what industry you're in, because a healthcare client will have different threats that they are looking at as opposed to, say, an oil and gas client or a school district. But I always like to use the analogy that, as basic as it sounds, when you're developing an overall security program, you want to make the would-be predator as difficult as possible to gain entry into your systems. And so I always use the analogy that if you're a thief and you are a burglar and you're trolling a neighborhood and you see one house that has a steel door, steel bars, cameras located all over the place with 4 bolt locks, and then next door, the neighbor has just a screen door that's swinging, flapping, opening into the wind. Well, it's the path of least resistance for these guys, and so they will take the path of least resistance and try to compromise where they can. Now, in the instances where you do have sensitive patient information or student information, or you have some very sensitive and highly secure data that you're trying to keep secure, then there are various points that you look at in your organization to how we're going to keep those secure. Um, one obvious in the healthcare industry and in the education industry is personable identifiable information. You have to make sure that you have developed systems and processes to make sure that anything related to a client's information, a patient or a student's information, is kept in the highest, strictest security regard possible. And so you have to look at the overall processes and procedures to protect them, but then you have to also start looking at the tools and technologies that are available to keep them safe and secure.
You're talking about keeping, data safe and secure. What are the biggest threats against that data? What are you seeing, in the current, I guess, current environment?
Right. I'll first start off by saying that there has been a significant trend. Fortunately, it's a good trend in the last 5 to 6 years, where um, the business is much more involved in the overall cybersecurity posture of an organization. And so, as I mentioned before, a lot of security leaders in the past approach security as purely a technical challenge dictated by technology and regulation. But having followed significant years of significant spend and unsatisfactory results, both security and business leaders are now starting to recognize that they have been asking the wrong questions and taking the wrong approach, and that business and security leaders are now having to become one team in order to tackle these challenges. And so we have experienced as an organization, that I'd say the top 5 or 6 trends that we're seeing is obviously, phishing threats. COVID-19 is also a new and big challenge from a security standpoint. Data breaches are still continuing to be the top cyber threat, along with ransomware attacks as well. And then internal cybersecurity awareness and training is another big gap that we can talk about. And then the cybersecurity skills gap. So there, as of a couple months ago, according to Gartner and Forrester, there were over 1 million security positions open in the United States alone. So there's not enough security skills resources available in the marketplace to keep up with the demand. And so those are some of the top ones that we've been experiencing.
Security is often looked at something that is a necessary part of a business, but maybe a cost center. Are there ways to turn security into something that can be marketed or a profit center for a business?
So for a company that is not in the security business, like DYOPATH. Let's say you're in the oil and gas business, or you're a hospital, or you're a teaching institution. We've not seen any organizations like that turn security into a profit center or how to drive more revenue through the organization. However, it's a great question, because the mindsets have changed over the years, from the standpoint of it's really risk avoidance. It comes down to cost avoidance. And so from an organization standpoint, even though it's not a revenue generator, it can be a significant risk and cost avoidance area into your company, because the last thing you want to be is in the papers, especially as a publicly traded company or a hospital or an education institution, that you've been breached, right? It's just going to raise all sorts of concerns with your community. It could affect your stock price, could affect the overall well-being of the company. So that's the non-financial aspect of risk avoidance. And then the cost avoidance side of that is it could cost you hundreds of thousands of dollars, if not millions of dollars, if you don't have a good security program in place. So the security leaders are now learning how to sell, so to speak, the security investment in an organization from that standpoint, to say, okay, Mr. CEO or board of directors, if you don't want to be in the paper, or if you don't want to have hundreds of thousands of dollars or $1 million of costs as a result of a breach, we really need to take these preventative measures.
Are there other considerations we should be talking about, or other things that our listeners or viewers should take into consideration as they're either looking at their security programs or their tooling or their processes, that you would like to share?
Yeah, there's a couple that come to mind. One is security assessments. So a lot of organizations will have annual or quarterly security assessments, and they feel like, okay, we've done our due diligence and we're good. We only had a few minor areas of risk, and we've addressed them, and now we can move on. And the problem with that is that's a snapshot in time. And as long as new threats are continually evolving, as long as new hackers are constantly evolving the way that they employ or deploy their techniques, zero-day viruses that even the biggest security companies in the world are not even aware of yet, those security assessments really don't do anything to address that, because you have to have an ongoing security program in place. And so that's why it's so important to have what DYOPATH calls a security as a service, which is an ongoing monitoring and management, not just of your infrastructure, but also of your overall cybersecurity program, your systems, your processes, your procedures, and to test them on a regular basis. The second one that comes to mind is, and I mentioned it just a minute ago, is internal cybersecurity training and awareness. I can't tell you that, well, the latest statistic is about 68% of all incidents or issues happen from within the organization. Some are intentional and most are not intentional. And it's little things like clicking on an email that you shouldn't click on, clicking on a link you shouldn't click on. And so the internal cybersecurity awareness and training is critical, and a lot of organizations really forget about that point. And it can be as simple as putting posters up in the kitchen, in the break rooms, making sure you've got a little card or a sticker on everybody's desktop or laptop, just reminding them of good, safe practices, making your passwords as complicated as possible. Just 2 years ago, the standard in the industry was to change your password every 90 days. And now it's not necessarily changing your password every 90 days as much as it is make your password as long and as complicated as possible that you can remember, but makes it that much more difficult for a hacker to try and compromise. So those two areas are the two biggest areas that come to mind, that really the investment in both of those is really not that significant. Obviously, internal security awareness and training is just time and keeping investing the time with your staff to make sure that you have your annual or quarterly review, refresher training, and then from an ongoing management and monitoring standpoint, technology costs have come down so much that really for as little as a couple $1,000s a month, maybe up to, who knows, 15, 20,000 a month, depending on the size of the organization, you can really have a comprehensive ongoing monitoring and management program in place that you can rest assured your systems are being protected.
You mentioned the ongoing monitoring and management, and I know a lot of organizations that will implement some type of a SIEM solution, but I believe that some of the challenges that they'll run into is just the massive amount of information that's generated in logs and things like that. Why? I guess what is the solution to that?
Well, so a SIEM solution, security information and event management, it really consists of two components. One is the human component, and two is the technology component. And so the technology component really is all about automation. And so like DYOPATH has, there are some amazing tools out there that know how to automate and aggregate information as it's coming in milliseconds. And because of the algorithms that you can deploy through these tools based on what you're wanting to look for, an automated tool set can basically scan and review hundreds, if not thousands, of breaches or false positives coming into your organization literally in seconds. And it's all rules based. So you can configure the tools to say, okay, if it's this type of information, then we want it to be routed to this process. If it's that type of information, we want it to be routed to that different process. And so the tools itself can help really automate and process, as you say, the hundreds of thousands of hits that some organizations are getting every day. The second part of that is the human component, which is like DYOPATH, we have trained security engineers and analysts that are on a 24/7 basis constantly reviewing those logs that are being produced by the technology tool sets. And so we sit down with each and every one of our clients and understand what's really important to understand about the type of organization that you have and the type of threats that you're concerned about. And we configure the tools to then address those. And then the individuals sitting in our security operations center will review those exceptions that are being filtered to us or through those different processes that I mentioned. And then based on their expertise, their certifications, their skill sets, they know how to escalate or address those particular threats as and when they come in. So it makes it much more manageable than if you just have either one or the other of those. If you just have the human component and there's no automation, it can be overwhelming. If you just have the technology tool set with nobody to really make human interaction decisions, it can be very difficult as well.
Makes a lot of sense. And I think it ties back to what you mentioned earlier in our discussion about just the shortage of expertise out there, and then possibly leaning on an organization like DYOPATH that has that expertise and has that human component around the clock.
Yeah, can I address that real quick?
Absolutely.
Yeah, so you just it's a good point. So the question that we often get asked is, should we or should we not outsource all or a part of our ongoing security management and monitoring function? And there's pros and cons to both. However, when you look at having an internal department that is responsible for monitoring and managing your infrastructure from a security standpoint, there's a couple limitations that they have. One is first the skills gap issue that I talked about. Trying to find and then properly interview and vet the top cybersecurity engineers that you need in your organization is a challenging task. If you don't know the right questions to ask, and if you don't know how to really filter out the ones that say they understand cybersecurity on paper versus really understanding real world scenarios, if you're not in that business, it's very difficult to hire the right people for your organization. The second area is that when you're living in one organization from an internal security operations center or network operations center, you're really living only within that world or that organization, and you're not being exposed to all the threats that are out there in multiple industries that are hitting all sorts of different organizations. And so your organization might get hit with something you've never seen before, where as an outsourced solution like DYOPATH, we see issues arise every day, all day long, 24/7 from multiple industries. And so it just better equips us and it better equips the engineers with recognizing and understanding the types of threats that are coming in. And then the training and the certifications. As everybody knows, cybersecurity resources are very expensive and they're very difficult to find. And so once you do find the quality ones, trying to keep them trained on the latest technologies, the latest emerging threats that happen every single day, can be very expensive and time consuming. And so if it's your own internal organization, you really have to ask yourself, what business are we in? Are we in the oil and gas business? Are we in the hospital care business? Are we in the education business? And let's focus on our resources and excelling in that area. And let's outsource those areas that we're not experts in, but companies like DYOPATH and others are experts in, and have them take care of that part of our organization.
Makes a lot of sense. Chuck, thanks so much for sharing your insight, and I hope that this information has been valuable to our listeners and possibly gets you thinking about that next step. If you found value in our podcast, please do subscribe and comment. You can also follow DYOPATH on LinkedIn, Twitter, and Facebook, and of course, you can find us on DYOPATH.com. Thank you.
Thanks for having me.